Gorgias by Plato, translated by Donald J. Zeal. Part 3. Callicles.
Tell me, Caraphon, is Socrates in earnest about this, or is he joking? I think he's in dead earnest about this, Callicles. There's nothing like asking him, though. By the gods, just the thing I'm eager to do. Tell me, Socrates, are we to take you as being in earnest now, or joking? For if you are in earnest, and these things you're saying are really true, won't this human life of ours be turned upside down, and won't everything we do evidently be the opposite of what we should do? Well, Callicles, if human beings didn't share common experiences, some sharing one, others sharing another, but one of us had some unique experience not shared by others, it wouldn't be easy for him to communicate what he experienced to the other. I say this because I realize that you and I are both now actually sharing a common experience. Each of the two of us is a lover of two objects, I of Alcibiades, Cleinias' son, and of philosophy, and you of the Demos, people of Athens, and the Demos who's the son of Pyrilampes. I notice that in each case you're unable to contradict your beloved, clever though you are, no matter what he says or what he claims is so. You keep shifting back and forth. If you say anything in the assembly and the Athenian Demos denies it, you shift your ground and say what it wants to hear. Other things like this happen to you when you're with that good-looking young man, the son of Pyrilampes. You're unable to oppose what your beloveds say or propose, so that if somebody heard you say what you do on their account and was amazed at how absurd that is, you'd probably say, if you were minded to tell him the truth, that unless somebody stops your beloveds from saying what they say, you'll never stop saying these things either. In that case, you must believe that you're bound to hear me say things like that too, and instead of being surprised at my saying them, you must stop my beloved philosophy from saying them. For she always says what you now hear me say, my dear friend, and she's by far less fickle than my other beloved. As for that son of Cleinias, what he says differs from one time to the next, but what philosophy says always stays the same, and she's saying things that now astound you, although you were present when they were said. So either refute her and show that doing what's unjust without paying what is due for it is not the ultimate of all evils, as I just now was saying it is, or else, if you leave this unrefuted, then by the dog, the god of the Egyptians, Callicles will not agree with you, Callicles, but will be dissonant with you all your life long. And yet for my part, my good man, I think it's better to have my lyre or a chorus that I might lead out of tune and dissonant, and have the vast majority of men disagree with me and contradict me, than to be out of harmony with myself, to contradict myself, although I'm only one person. Socrates, I think you're grandstanding in these speeches, acting like a true crowd-pleaser. Here you are, playing to the crowd now that Polus has had the same thing happen to him that he accused Gorgias of letting you do to him. For he said, didn't he, that when Gorgias was asked by you whether he would teach anyone who came to him wanting to learn oratory, but without expertise in what's just, Gorgias was ashamed, and out of deference to human custom, since people would take it ill if a person refused, said that he'd teach him. And because Gorgias agreed on this point, he said, he was forced to contradict himself, just the thing you like. He ridiculed you at the time, and rightly so I think, anyhow. And now the very same thing has happened to him, and for this same reason I don't approve of Polus. He agreed with you that doing what's unjust is more shameful than suffering it. As a result of this admission, he was bound and gagged by you in the discussion, too ashamed to say what he thought. Although you claim to be pursuing the truth, you're in fact bringing the discussion around to the sort of crowd-pleasing vulgarities that are admirable only by law and not by nature. And these, nature and law, are for the most part opposed to each other, so if a person is ashamed and doesn't dare to say what he thinks, he's forced to contradict himself. This is, in fact, the clever trick you've thought of, with which you work mischief in your discussions. If a person makes a statement in terms of law, you slyly question him in terms of nature. If he makes it in terms of nature, you question him in terms of law. That's just what happened here on the question of doing what's unjust versus suffering it. Well, Polus meant that doing it is more shameful by law. You pursued the argument as though he meant by nature. For by nature, all that is more evil is also more shameful, like suffering what's unjust, whereas by law, doing it is more shameful. No man would put up with suffering what's unjust. Only a slave would do so, one who is better dead than alive, who, when he's treated unjustly and abused, can't protect himself or anyone else he cares about. I believe that the people who institute our laws are the weak and the many. They do this, and they assign praise and blame with themselves and their own advantage in mind. They are afraid of the more powerful among men, the ones who are capable of having a greater share, and so they say that getting more than one's share is shameful and unjust, and that doing what's unjust is trying to get more than one's share. They do this so that those people won't get a greater share than they. I think they like getting an equal share, since they are inferior. These are the reasons why trying to get a greater share than most is said to be unjust and shameful by law, and why they call it doing what's unjust. But I believe that nature itself reveals that it's a just thing for the better man and the more capable man to have a greater share than the worse man and the less capable man. Nature shows that this is so in many places, both among the other animals and in whole cities and races of men. It shows that this is what justice has been decided to be, that the superior rule the inferior and have a greater share than they. For what sort of justice did Xerxes go by when he campaigned against Greece? Or his father when he campaigned against Scythia? Countless other such examples could be mentioned. I believe that these men do these things in accordance with the nature of what's just. Yes, by Zeus, in accordance with the law of nature, and presumably not with the one we institute. We mold the best and the most powerful among us, taking them while they're still young, like lion cubs, and with charms and incantations we subdue them into slavery, telling them that one is supposed to get no more than his fair share, and that that's what's admirable and just. And I believe that if a man whose nature is equal to it were to arise, one who had shaken off, torn apart, and escaped all this, who had trampled underfoot our documents, our tricks and charms, and all our laws that violate nature, he, the slave, would rise up and be revealed as our master, and here the justice of nature would shine forth. I think Pindar, too, refers to what I'm saying in that song in which he says that Law, the king of all, of mortals and the immortal gods. This, he says, brings on and renders just what is most violent with towering hand. I take as proof of this the deeds of Heracles, for he, unbought. His words are something like that. I don't know the song well. He says that Heracles drove off Gerion's cattle even though he hadn't paid for them, and Gerion hadn't given them to him, on the ground that this is what's just by nature, and that cattle and all the other possessions of those who are worse and inferior belong to the one who's better and superior. This is the truth of the matter, as you will acknowledge if you abandon philosophy and move on to more important things. Philosophy is no doubt a delightful thing, Socrates, as long as one is exposed to it in moderation at the appropriate time of life. But if one spends more time with it than he should, it's the undoing of mankind. For even if one is naturally well-favored, but engages in philosophy far beyond that appropriate time of life, he can't help but turn out to be inexperienced in everything a man who's to be admirable and good and well thought of is supposed to be experienced in. Such people turn out to be inexperienced in the laws of their city or in the kind of speech one must use to deal with people on matters of business, whether in public or private, inexperienced also in human pleasures and appetites, and in short, inexperienced in the ways of human beings altogether. So, when they venture into some private or political activity, they become a laughingstock, as I suppose men in politics do when they venture into your pursuits and your kind of speech. What results is Euripides saying, where he says that each man shines in this and presses on to this, allotting the greatest part of the day to this, where he finds himself at his best? And whatever a man's inferior in, he avoids and rails against it, while he praises the other thing, thinking well of himself and supposing that in this way he's praising himself. I believe, however, that it's most appropriate to have a share of both. To partake of as much philosophy as your education requires is an admirable thing, and it's not shameful to practice philosophy while you're a boy. But when you still do it after you've grown older and become a man, the thing gets to be ridiculous, Socrates. My own reaction to men who philosophize is very much like that to men who speak haltingly and play like children. When I see a child for whom it's still quite proper to make conversation this way, halting in its speech and playing like a child, I'm delighted. I find it a delightful thing, liberal and appropriate for the child's age. But when I hear a small child speaking clearly, I think it's a harsh thing. It hurts my ears. I think it is something fit for a slave. And when one hears a man speaking haltingly or sees him playing like a child, it strikes me as ridiculous and unmanly, deserving of a flogging. Now, I react in the same way to men who engage in philosophy, too. When I see philosophy in a young boy, I approve of it. I think it's appropriate and consider such a person a liberal one, whereas I consider one who doesn't engage in philosophy illiberal, one who will never count himself deserving of any admirable or noble thing. But when I see an older man still engaging in philosophy and not giving it up, I think such a man by this time needs a flogging. For, as I was just now saying, it's typical that such a man, even if he's naturally very well favored, becomes unmanly and avoids the centers of his city and the marketplaces, in which, according to the poet, men attain preeminence, and instead lives the rest of his life in hiding, whispering in a quarter with 3 or 4 boys, never uttering anything liberal, important, or apt. Socrates, I do have a rather warm regard for you. I find myself feeling what Zethus, whose words I recalled just now, felt toward Amphion in Euripides' play. In fact, the sort of things he said to his brother come to mind to say to you. You're neglecting the things you should devote yourself to, Socrates, and though your spirit's nature is so noble, you show yourself to the world in the shape of a boy. You couldn't put a speech together correctly before councils of justice, or utter any plausible or persuasive sound, nor could you make any bold proposal on behalf of anyone else. And so then, my dear Socrates, please don't be upset with me, for it is with good will toward you that I'll say this. Don't you think it's shameful to be the way I take you to be, you and the others who ever press on too far in philosophy? As it is, if someone got hold of you, or anyone else like you, and took you off to prison on the charge that you're doing something unjust, when in fact you aren't, you can know that you wouldn't have any use for yourself. You'd get dizzy, your mouth would hang open, and you wouldn't know what to say. You'd come up for trial and face some no-good wretch of an accuser and be put to death, if death is what he'd want to condemn you to. And yet, Socrates, how can this be a wise thing, the craft which took a well-favored man and made him worse, able neither to protect himself nor to rescue himself or anyone else from the gravest dangers, to be robbed of all his property by his enemies, and to live a life with absolutely no rights in his city? Such a man one could knock on the jaw without paying what's due for it, to put it rather crudely. Listen to me, my good man, and stop this refuting. Practice the sweet music of an active life, and do it where you'll get a reputation for being intelligent. Leave these subtleties to others, whether we should call them just silly or outright nonsense, which will cause you to live in empty houses, and envy not those men who refute such trivia, but those who have life and renown, and many other good things as well. If I actually had a soul made of gold, Callicles, don't you think I'd be pleased to find one of those stones on which they test gold? And if this stone, to which I intended to take my soul, were the best stone, and it agreed that my soul had been well cared for, don't you think I could well know at that point that I'm in good shape and need no further test? What's the point of your question, Socrates? I'll tell you, I believe that by running into you, I've run into just such a piece of luck. Why do you say that? I well know that if you concur with what my soul believes, then that is the very truth. I realize that the person who intends to put his soul to an adequate test to see whether it lives rightly or not must have 3 qualities, all of which you have: knowledge, goodwill, and frankness. I run into many people who aren't able to test me because they're not wise like you. Others are wise, but they're not willing to tell me the truth because they don't care for me the way you do. As for these two visitors, Gorgias and Polus, they're both wise and fond of me, but rather more lacking in frankness, and more ashamed than they should be. No wonder. They have come to such a depth of shame that, because they are ashamed, each of them dares to contradict himself, face to face with many people, and on topics of the greatest importance. You have all these qualities which the others don't. You're well enough educated, as many of the Athenians would attest, and you have goodwill toward me. What's my proof of this? I'll tell you. I know, Callicles, that there are 4 of you who've become partners in wisdom. You, Tessiander of Aphidnae, Adron, the son of Androchon, Nausidius of Colorog. Once I overheard you deliberating on how far one should cultivate wisdom, and I know that some such opinion as this was winning out among you. You called on each other not to enthusiastically pursue philosophizing to the point of pedantry, but to be careful not to become wiser than necessary, and so inadvertently bring yourselves to ruin. So, now that I hear you giving me the same advice you gave your closest companions, I have sufficient proof that you really do have goodwill toward me. And as to my claim that you're able to speak frankly without being ashamed, you yourself say so, and the speech you gave a moment ago bears you out. It's clear, then, that this is how these matters stand at the moment. If there's any point in our discussions on which you agree with me, then that point will have been adequately put to the test by you and me, and it will not be necessary to put it to any further test. For you'd never have conceded the point through lack of wisdom or excess of shame, and you wouldn't do so by lying to me either. You are my friend, as you yourself say, too, so our mutual agreement will really lay hold of truth in the end. Most admirable of all, Callicles, is the examination of those issues about which you took me to task, that of what a man is supposed to be like, and of what he's supposed to devote himself to, and how far, when he's older and when he's young. For my part, if I engage in anything that's improper in my own life, please know well that I do not make this mistake intentionally, but out of my ignorance. So don't leave off lecturing me the way you began, but show me clearly what it is I'm to devote myself to, and in what way I might come by it. If you catch me agreeing with you now, but at a later time not doing the very things I've agreed upon, then take me for a very stupid fellow, and don't bother ever afterward with lecturing me, on the ground that I'm a worthless fellow. Please restate your position for me from the beginning. What is it that you and Pindar hold to be true of what's just by nature, that the superior should take by force what belongs to the inferior, that the better should rule the worse, and the more worthy have a greater share than the less worthy? You're not saying anything else, are you? I do remember correctly. Yes, that's what I was saying then, and I still say so now, too. Is it the same man you call both better and superior? I wasn't able then either to figure out what you meant. Is it the stronger ones you call superior, and should those who are weaker take orders from the one who's stronger? That's what I think you were trying to show then also, when you said that large cities attack small ones according to what's just by nature, because they're superior and stronger, assuming that superior, stronger, and better are the same. Or is it possible for one to be better and also inferior and weaker, or greater but more wretched? Or do better and superior have the same definition? Please define this for me clearly. Are superior, better, and stronger the same, or are they different? Very well, I'm telling you clearly that they're the same. Now, aren't the many superior by nature to the one? They're the ones who in fact impose the laws upon the one, as you were saying yourself a moment ago. Of course. So the rules of the many are the rules of the superior. Yes, they are. Aren't they the rules of the better? For by your reasoning, I take it, the superior are the better. Yes, and aren't the rules of these people admirable by nature, seeing that they're the superior ones? That's my view. Now, isn't it a rule of the many that it's just to have an equal share, and then doing what's unjust is more shameful than suffering it, as you yourself were saying just now? Is this so or not? Be careful that you, in your turn, don't get caught being ashamed now. Do the many observe or do they not observe the rule that it's just to have an equal and not a greater share, and that doing what's unjust is more shameful than suffering it? Don't grudge me your answer to this, Callicles, so that if you agree with me I may have my confirmation from you, seeing that it's the agreement of a man competent to pass judgment. All right, The many do have that rule. It's not only by law, then, that just doing what's unjust is more shameful than suffering it, or just to have an equal share, but it's so by nature, too. So it looks as though you weren't saying what's true earlier, and weren't right to accuse me when you said that nature and law were opposed to each other, and that I, well aware of this, am making mischief in my statements, taking any statement someone makes meant in terms of nature, in terms of law, and any statement meant in terms of law, in terms of nature. This man will not stop talking nonsense. Tell me, Socrates, aren't you ashamed at your age of trying to catch people's words and of making hay out of someone's tripping on a phrase? Do you take me to mean by people being superior anything else than their being better? Haven't I been telling you all along that by better and superior I mean the same thing? Or do you suppose that I'm saying that if a rubbish heap of slaves and motley men, worthless except perhaps in physical strength, get together and make any statements, then these are the rules? Fair enough, wisest Callicles. Is this what you're saying? It certainly is. Well, my marvelous friend, I guessed some time ago that it's some such thing you mean by superior, and I'm questioning you because I'm intent upon knowing clearly what you mean. I don't really suppose that you think two are better than one, or that your slaves are better than you just because they're stronger than you. Tell me once more from the beginning. What do you mean by the better, seeing that it's not the stronger? And my wonderful man, go easier on me in your teaching so that I won't quit your school. You're being ironic, Socrates. No, I'm not, Callicles, by Zethus, the character you were invoking in being ironic with me so often just now. But come and tell me, whom do you mean by the better? I mean the worthier. So do you see that you yourself are uttering words without making anything clear? Won't you say whether by the better and the superior you mean the more intelligent or any others? Yes, by Zeus, they're very much the ones I mean. So on your reasoning, it will often be the case that a single intelligent person is superior to countless unintelligent ones, that this person should rule and they be ruled, and that the one ruling should have a greater share than the ones being ruled. This is the meaning I think you intend, and I'm not trying to catch you with a phrase. If the one is superior to these countless others. Yes, that's what I do mean. This is what I take the just by nature to be, that the better one, the more intelligent one, that is, both rules over and has a greater share than his inferiors. Hold it right there. What can your meaning be this time? Suppose we were assembled together in great numbers in the same place as we are now, and we held in common a great supply of food and drink. And suppose we were a motley group, some strong and some weak, but one of us, being a doctor, was more intelligent about these things. He would very likely be stronger than some and weaker than others. Now this man, being more intelligent than we are, will certainly be better and superior in these matters. Yes, he will. So should he have a share of this food greater than ours because he's better? Or should he be the one to distribute everything because he's in charge, but not to get a greater share to consume and use up on his own body if he's to escape being punished for it? Shouldn't he instead have a greater share than some and a lesser than others, and if he should happen to be the weakest of all, shouldn't the best man have the least share of all, Callicles? Isn't this so, my good man? You keep talking food and drink and doctors and such nonsense. That's not what I mean. Don't you mean that the more intelligent one is the better one? Say yes or no. Yes, I do, but not that the better should have a greater share. Not of food or drink, anyhow. I see. Of clothes, perhaps? Should the weaver have the biggest garment and go about wearing the greatest number and the most beautiful clothes? What do you mean, clothes? But when it comes to shoes, obviously the most intelligent, the best man in that area should have the greater share. Perhaps the cobbler should walk around with the largest and greatest number of shoes on. What do you mean, shoes? You keep on with this nonsense. Well, if that's not the sort of thing you mean, perhaps it's this. Take a farmer, a man intelligent and admirable and good about land. Perhaps he should have the greater share of seed and the use of the largest possible quantity of it on his own land. How you keep on saying the same thing, Socrates. Yes, Callicles, not only the same things, but also about the same subjects. By the gods, you simply don't let up on your continual talk of shoemakers and cleaners, cooks and doctors, as if our discussion were about them. Won't you say whom it's about, then? What does the superior, the more intelligent man have a greater share of, and have it justly? Will you neither bear with my promptings nor tell me yourself? I've been saying it all along. First of all, by the ones who are superior, I don't mean cobblers or cooks. Those who are intelligent about the affairs of the city, about the way it's to be well managed, and not only intelligent, but also brave, competent to accomplish whatever they have in mind, without slackening off because of softness of spirit. Do you see, my good Callicles, that you and I are not accusing each other of the same things? You claim that I'm always saying the same things, and you criticize me for it, whereas I, just the opposite of you, claim that you never say the same things about the same subjects. At one time you were defining the better and the superior as the stronger, then again as the more intelligent, and now you've come up with something else again. The superior and the better are now said by you to be the braver. But tell me, my good fellow, once and for all, whom do you mean by the better and the superior, and what they're better and superior in? But I've already said that I mean those who are intelligent in the affairs of the city, and brave too. It's fitting that they should be the ones who rule the cities, and what's just is that they, as the rulers, should have a greater share than the others, the ruled. But what of themselves, my friend? What of what? Ruling or being ruled? What do you mean? I mean each individual ruling himself, or is there no need at all for him to rule himself, but only to rule others? What do you mean, rule himself? Nothing very subtle, just what the many mean, being self-controlled and master of oneself, ruling the pleasures and appetites within oneself. How delightful you are! By the self-controlled you mean the stupid ones. How so? There's no one who'd fail to recognize that I mean no such thing. Yes, you do, Socrates, very much so. How could a man prove to be happy if he's enslaved to anyone at all? Rather, this is what's admirable and just by nature, and I'll say it to you now with all frankness, that the man who'll live correctly ought to allow his own appetites to get as large as possible and not restrain them, and when they are as large as possible, he ought to be competent to devote himself to them by virtue of his bravery and intelligence, and to fill them with whatever he may have an appetite for at the time. But this isn't possible for the many, I believe. Hence, they become detractors of people like this because of the shame they feel, while they conceal their own impotence. And they say that lack of discipline is shameful, as I was saying earlier, and so they enslave men who are better by nature. And while they themselves lack the ability to provide for themselves fulfillment of their pleasures, their own lack of courage leads them to praise self-control and justice. As for all those who are either sons of kings to begin with, or else naturally competent to secure some position of rule for themselves as tyrants or potentates, what in truth could be more shameful and worse than self-control and justice for these people who, although they are free to enjoy good things without any interference, should bring as master upon themselves the law of the many, their talk and their criticism? Or how could they exist without becoming miserable under that admirable regime of justice and self-control, allotting no greater share to their friends than to their enemies, and in this way rule in their cities? Rather, the truth of it, Socrates, the thing you claim to pursue, is like this: wantonness, lack of discipline, and freedom, if available in good supply, are excellence and happiness. As for these other things, these fancy phrases, these contracts of men that go against nature, they are worthless nonsense. The way you pursue your argument, speaking frankly as you do, certainly does you credit, Callicles, for you are now saying clearly what others are thinking but are unwilling to say. I beg you, then, not to relax in any way, so that it may really become clear how we're to live. Tell me, are you saying that if a person is to be the kind of person he should be, he shouldn't restrain his appetites, but let them become as large as possible, and then should procure their fulfillment from some source or other, and that this is excellence? Yes, that's what I'm saying. So then, those who have no need of anything are wrongly said to be happy? Yes, for in that case stones and corpses would be happiest. But then the life of those people you call happiest is a strange one, too. I shouldn't be surprised that Euripides' lines are true when he says, "But who knows whether being alive is being dead, and being dead is being alive? Perhaps in reality we're dead. Once I even heard one of the wise men say that we are now dead, and that our bodies are our tombs, and that the part of our souls in which our appetites reside is actually the sort of thing to be open to persuasion and to shift back and forth. And hence some clever man, a teller of stories, a Sicilian perhaps, or an Italian, named this part a jar, on account of its being a persuadable and suggestible thing, thus slightly changing the name. And fools he named uninitiated, suggesting that the parts of the soul of fools where their appetites are located is their undisciplined part, not one tightly closed, a leaking jar, as it were. He based the image on its instability. Now this man Callicles, quite to the contrary of your view, shows that of the people in Hades, meaning the unseen, these, the uninitiated ones, would be the most miserable. They would carry water into the leaking jar using another leaking thing, a sieve. That's why by the sieves he means the soul, as the man who talked with me claimed. And because they leak, he likened the souls of fools to sieves, for their untrustworthiness and forgetfulness makes them unable to retain anything. This account is on the whole a bit strange, but now that I've shown it to you, it does make clear what I want to persuade you to change your mind about, if I can, to choose the orderly life, the life that is adequate to and satisfied with its circumstances at any given time, instead of the insatiable, undisciplined life. Do I persuade you at all, and are you changing your mind to believe that those who are orderly are happier than those who are undisciplined? Or even if I tell you many other such stories, will you change it none the more for that? The latter thing you said is the truer, Socrates. Come then, and let me give you another image, one from the same school as this one. Consider whether what you're saying about each life, the life of the self-controlled man, and that of the undisciplined one, is like this. Suppose there are two men, each of whom has many jars. The jars belonging to one of them are sound and full, one with wine, another with honey, a third with milk, and many others with lots of other things. And suppose that the sources of each of these things are scarce and difficult to come by, procurable only with much toil and trouble. Now the one man, having filled up his jars, doesn't pour anything more into them and gives them no further thought. He can relax over them. As for the other one, he too has resources that can be procured, though with difficulty, but his containers are leaky and rotten. He's forced to keep on filling them day and night, or else he suffers extreme pain. Now, since each life is the way I describe it, are you saying that the life of the undisciplined man is happier than that of the orderly man? When I say this, do I at all persuade you to concede that the orderly life is better than the undisciplined one, or do I not? You do not, Socrates. The man who has filled himself up has no pleasure any more, and when he's been filled up and experiences neither joy nor pain, that's living like a stone, as I was saying just now. Rather, living pleasantly consists in this, having as much as possible flow in. Isn't it necessary, then, that if there's a lot flowing in, there should also be a lot going out, and that there should be big holes for what passes out? Certainly. Now you're talking about the life of a stone curlew instead of that of a corpse or a stone. Tell me, do you say that there is such a thing as hunger and eating when one is hungry? Yes, there is. And thirst and drinking when one is thirsty. Yes, and also having all other appetites and being able to fill them and enjoy them, and so live happily. Very good, my good man. Do carry on the way you've begun, and take care not to be ashamed. And I evidently shouldn't shrink from being ashamed either. Tell me now first whether a man who has an itch and scratches it, and can scratch to his heart's content, scratching his whole life long, can also live happily. What nonsense, Socrates! You're a regular crowd-pleaser. That's just how I shocked Polus and Gorgias and made them be ashamed. You certainly won't be shocked, however, or be ashamed, for you're a brave man. Just answer me, please. I say that even the man who scratches would have a pleasant life. And if a pleasant one, a happy one too? Yes, indeed. What if he scratches only his head, or what am I to ask you further? See what you'll answer if somebody asks you, one after the other, every question that comes next. And isn't the climax of this sort of thing the life of catamites, a frightfully shameful and miserable one? Or will you have the nerve to say that they are happy as long as they have what they need to their heart's content? Aren't you ashamed, Socrates, to bring our discussion to such matters? Is it I who bring them there, my splendid fellow, or is it the man who claims, just like that those who enjoy themselves, however they may be doing it, are happy, and doesn't discriminate between good kinds of pleasure and bad? Tell me now, too, whether you say that the pleasant and the good are the same, or whether there is some pleasure that isn't good. Well, to keep my agreement from being inconsistent, if I say that they're different, I say they're the same. You're wrecking your earlier statements, Callicles, and you'd no longer be adequately inquiring into the truth of the matter with me if you speak contrary to what you think. You do it too, Socrates. In that case, it isn't right for me to do it, if it's what I do, or for you either. But consider, my marvelous friend, surely the good isn't just unrestricted enjoyment, for both those many shameful things hinted at just now obviously follow if this is the case, and many others as well. That's your opinion, Socrates. Do you really assert these things, Callicles? Yes, I do. So we're to undertake the discussion on the assumption that you're in earnest. Most certainly. All right, since that's what you think, distinguish the following things for me. There is something you call knowledge, I take it. Yes. Weren't you also saying just now that there is such a thing as bravery with knowledge? Yes, I was. Was it just on the assumption that bravery is distinct from knowledge that you were speaking of them as two? Yes, very much so. Well now, do you say that pleasure and knowledge are the same or different? Different, of course, you wisest of men. And surely that bravery is different from pleasure, too. Of course. All right, let's put this on the record. Callicles from Arcania says that pleasant and good are the same, and that knowledge and bravery are different both from each other and from what's good. And Socrates from Alopici doesn't agree with us about this, or does he? He does not, and I believe that Callicles doesn't either when he comes to see himself rightly. Tell me, don't you think that those who do well have the opposite experience of those who do badly? Yes, I do. Now, since these experiences are the opposite of each other, isn't it necessary that it's just the same within them as it is with the health and disease? For a man isn't both healthy and sick at the same time, I take it, nor does he get rid of both health and disease at the same time. What do you mean? Take any part of the body you like, for example, and think about it. A man can have a disease of the eyes, can't he, to which we gave the name eye disease, of course, but then surely his eyes aren't also healthy at the same time. No, not in any way. What if he gets rid of his eye disease? Does he then also get rid of his eye's health, and so in the end he's rid of both at the same time? No, not in the least. For that, I suppose, is an amazing and unintelligible thing to happen, isn't it? Yes, it very much is. But he acquires and loses each of them successively, I suppose. Yes, I agree. Isn't it like this with strength and weakness, too? Yes, and with speed and slowness? Yes, that's right. Now, does he acquire and get rid of good things and happiness, and their opposites, bad things and misery, successively, too? No doubt he does. So if we find things that a man both gets rid of and keeps at the same time, it's clear that these things wouldn't be what's good and what's bad. Are we agreed on that? Think very carefully about it and tell me. Yes, I agree most emphatically. Go back now to what we've agreed on previously. You mentioned hunger as a pleasant or a painful thing. I mean the hunger itself. As a painful thing, but for a hungry man to eat is pleasant. I agree. I understand, but the hunger itself is painful, isn't it? So I say. And thirst is, too. Very much so. Am I to ask any further, or do you agree that every deficiency in appetite is painful? I do. No need to ask. Fair enough. Wouldn't you say that, for a thirsty person, to drink is something pleasant? Yes, I would. And in the case you speak of, a thirsty person means a person who's in pain, I take it. Yes. And drinking is a filling of the deficiency, and is a pleasure. Yes. Now, don't you mean that insofar as a person is drinking, he's feeling enjoyment? Very much so, even though he's thirsty. Yes, I agree. Even though he's in pain. Yes. Do you observe the result that when you say that a thirsty person drinks, you're saying that a person who's in pain simultaneously feels enjoyment? Or doesn't this happen simultaneously in the same place, in the soul or in the body, as you like? I don't suppose it makes any difference which. Is this so or not? It is. But you do say that it's impossible for a person who's doing well to be doing badly at the same time. Yes, I do. Yet you did agree that it's possible for a person in pain to feel enjoyment. Apparently. So feeling enjoyment isn't the same thing as doing well, and being in pain isn't the same as doing badly, and the result is that what's pleasant turns out to be different from what's good. I don't know what your clever remarks amount to, Socrates. You do know. You're just pretending you don't, Callicles. Go just a bit further ahead. Why do you keep up with this nonsense? So you'll know how wise you are in scolding me. Doesn't each of us stop being thirsty and stop feeling pleasure at the same time as a result of drinking? I don't know what you mean. Not at all, Callicles. Answer him for our benefit too, so that the discussion may be carried through. But Socrates is always like this, Gorgias. He keeps questioning people on matters that are trivial, hardly worthwhile, and refutes them. What difference does that make to you? It's none of your business to appraise them, Callicles. You promised Socrates that he could try to refute you in any way he liked. Go ahead then and ask these trivial, petty questions, since that's what pleases Gorgias. You're a happy man, Callicles, in that you've been initiated into the greater mysteries before the lesser. I didn't think it was permitted. So answer where you left off and tell me whether each of us stops feeling pleasure at the same time as he stops being thirsty. That's my view. And doesn't he also stop having pleasure at the same time as he stops being hungry or stops having the other appetites? That's so. Doesn't he then also stop having pains and pleasures at the same time? Yes. But he certainly doesn't stop having good things and bad things at the same time, as you agree. Don't you still agree? Yes, I do. Why? Because it turns out that good things are not the same as pleasant ones, and bad things not the same as painful ones. For pleasant and painful things come to a stop simultaneously, whereas good things and bad ones do not, because they are in fact different things. How then could pleasant things be the same as good ones, and painful things the same as bad ones? Look at it this way too, if you like, for I don't suppose that you agree with that argument either. Consider this. Don't you call men good because of the presence of good things in them, just as you call them good-looking because of the presence of good looks? Yes, I do. Well then, do you call foolish and cowardly men good? You didn't a while ago. You were then calling brave and intelligent ones good. Or don't you call these men good? Oh, yes, I do. Well then, have you ever seen a foolish child feel enjoyment? Yes, I have. But you've never yet seen a foolish man feel enjoyment? Yes, I suppose I have. What's the point? Nothing. Just answer me. Yes, I've seen it. Well now, have you ever seen an intelligent man feel pain or enjoyment? Yes, I dare say I have. Now, who feels pain or enjoyment more, intelligent men or foolish ones? I don't suppose there's a lot of difference. Good enough. Have you ever seen a cowardly man in combat? Of course I have. Well then, when the enemy retreated, who do you think felt enjoyment more, the cowards or the brave men? Both felt it, I think. Maybe the coward felt it more, but if not, they felt it pretty much to the same degree. Makes no difference. So cowards feel enjoyment too. Oh yes, very much so. Fools do too, evidently. Yes. Now, when the enemy advances, are the cowards the only ones to feel pain, or do the brave men do so too? They both do. To the same degree? Maybe the cowards feel it more. And when the enemy retreats, don't they feel enjoyment more? Maybe. So don't foolish men and intelligent ones, and cowardly men and brave ones feel enjoyment and pain to pretty much the same degree, as you say, or cowardly men feel them more than brave ones? That's my view. But surely the intelligent and brave men are good, and the cowardly and foolish are bad. Yes. Hence, the degree of enjoyment and pain that good and bad men feel is pretty much the same. I agree. Now, are good and bad men pretty much equally both good and bad, or are the bad ones even better? By Zeus, I don't know what you mean. Don't you know that you say that the good men are good and the bad men bad because of the presence of good or bad things in them, and that the good things are pleasures and the bad ones pains? Yes, I do. Aren't good things, pleasures, present in men who feel enjoyment, if in fact they do feel it? Of course. Now, aren't men who feel enjoyment good men because good things are present in them? Yes. Well then, aren't bad things, pains, present in men who feel pain? Yes, they are. And you do say that it's because of the presence of bad things that bad men are bad. Or don't you say this anymore? Yes, I do. So all those who feel enjoyment are good, and all those who feel pain are bad. Yes, that's right. And those feeling them more are more so, those feeling them less are less so, and those feeling them to pretty much the same degree are good or bad to pretty much the same degree. Yes. Now, aren't you saying that intelligent men and foolish ones, and cowardly and courageous ones, experience pretty much the same degree of enjoyment and pain, or even that cowardly ones experience more of it? Yes, I am. Join me then in adding up what follows for us from our agreements. They say it's an admirable thing to speak of and examine what's admirable twice and even thrice. We say that the intelligent and brave man is good, don't we? Yes. And that the foolish and cowardly man is bad. Yes, that's right. And again that the man who feels enjoyment is good. Yes. And the one experiencing pain is bad, necessarily. And that the good and the bad man feel pain and enjoyment to the same degree, and that perhaps the bad man feels them even more. Yes. Doesn't it then turn out that the bad man is both good and bad to the same degree as the good man? Or even that he's better? Isn't this what follows, along with those earlier statements, if one holds that pleasant things are the same as good things? Isn't this necessarily the case, Callicles? I have been listening to you for quite some time now, Socrates, and agreeing with you, while thinking that even if a person grants some point to you in jest, you gladly fasten on it the way boys do, as though you really think that I or anybody else at all don't believe that some pleasures are better and others worse. Oh, Callicles, what a rascal you are. You treat me like a child. At one time you say that things are one way, and at another time the same things are another way, and so you deceive me. And yet I didn't suppose at the beginning that I'd be deceived intentionally by you, because I assumed you were a friend. Now, however, I've been misled, and evidently have no choice but to make the best with what I have, as the ancient proverb has it, and to accept what I'm given by you. The thing you're saying now, evidently, is that some pleasures are good while others are bad. Is that right? Yes. Are the good ones the beneficial ones, and the bad ones the harmful ones? Yes, that's right. And the beneficial ones are the ones which produce some good, while the bad ones are those that produce some evil. That's my view. Now, do you mean pleasures like the ones we were just now mentioning in connection with the body, those of eating and drinking? Do some of these produce health in the body or strength, and some other bodily excellence, and are these pleasures good, while those that produce the opposites of these things are bad? That's right. And similarly, aren't some pains good and others bad too? Of course. Now, shouldn't we both choose and act to have the good pleasures and pains? Yes, we should, but not the bad ones, obviously. No, for Polus and I both thought, if you recall, that we should do all things for the sake of what's good, I take it. Do you also think, as we do, that the end of all action is what's good, and that we should do all other things for its sake, but not it for their sake? Are you voting on our side to make it 3? Yes, I am. So we should do the other things, including pleasant things, for the sake of good things, and not good things for the sake of pleasant things. That's right.